Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith. Today guys we're going to be talking a little bit more about Nikon's new D5. Now some weeks ago, back when Nikon, just shortly after Nikon released the D5 and D500, I got a chance to make a little video talking about both those cameras. And I feel like my video was more detailed than a lot of the other ones that were provided on the web at that time. I was actually really excited to see that video appearing on Nikon Rumors and a couple of other sites. Unfortunately though, at that time, because of Nikon's very strict guidelines, I was not able to post any sample photographs from the D5 or the D500. But today we can finally take a look at some samples. Now I am going to be bringing you guys some sample images from the D500 in a separate video. Today we're going to be talking about the D5. Oh yeah, and by the way, today we're actually recording in 4K, and I'm using the Sony a6300 along with the Atomos Shogun recorder. Now, the a6300, as you know, I was not particularly kind to it in my assessment of it in terms of still photography. I talked about the ergonomics and all that, but now I'm going to see how it does in video. So stay tuned for that update as well. Okay, taking a look though at these Nikon D5 images. This camera, you know, I've been doing a lot of reading about it so far, obviously. This camera gives us an insane ISO range. You know, it goes natively from 100 ISO up to like 102,000 ISO. Very, very insane range. Now, a lot of people have been commenting a lot on how this camera handles base ISO at 100. A lot of people have said that it's got, you know, a lot less dynamic range than any other Nikon in this particular range. And a little bit of a word about that. You know, in favor of producing higher ISO capabilities, a lot of the camera companies, namely Canon in the past, have decided to set their sensor up and their analog to digital conversion up in a way to where you have a little bit more read noise at lower ISO, which translates over into image quality that's not as good as at base ISO, but it allows the camera to do much, much better at higher ISO. Now, I'm not going to make this terribly scientific, but the short answer to all this is that in order to have a camera that does extremely well at high ISO, oftentimes low ISO performance has to be sacrificed. And that kind of seems like Nikon has done that with the D5 a little bit. You know, a lot of people that do portraits and landscapes have expressed a little bit of concern about this. Personally, I don't really understand the complaints there. You know, at breakfast a lot of times I find myself eating a banana with my cereal, and sometimes I cut my banana with my spoon. Now, just because my spoon is capable of cutting the banana does not mean that I expect to use the spoon as a knife in place of a knife all the time. So what I'm saying is, with something like the D5, you know, it's designed to shoot at high ISO. It's designed for sports photographers and such. If you're doing portrait or landscape photography and you're concerned about base ISO performance, really the D810, that's what that camera is designed for. You know, it's not, you know, it's designed to give you that type of image quality. So I still don't fully understand the need for portrait photographers to use the flagship high-end sports camera for portrait work. I think the D810 is a much, much better tool. So yeah, put away the spoon and get a real knife. Anyways, with that being said though, looking at this camera for what it's designed for, this camera does extremely well. I took sample photos from ISO 100 all the way up to the highest ISO, and I'm going to be posting these for you guys all to take a look at. I have a link to some raw files in the description for you as well. At low ISO, you know, 100 ISO, it looks very, very good, obviously. I'm going to keep on going up here. I noticed that if you raise the shadow detail, you know, you still get a fair bit of performance there. There's still not a whole lot of noise, but yeah, something like a D810 is going to be better in that area. But you guys, like I say, you guys don't necessarily care about that ISO. I noticed that going up from 100 ISO to about, going from about 100 ISO up to about 800 ISO is pretty similar on this camera. You don't see a whole lot of change here. Let's see here. 800 ISO is still extremely clean. All these cameras these days at high ISO, they still produce so much detail in the files. It's possible to zoom right on in. And I'll do a little side-by-side comparison showing you guys 100 ISO to 800 ISO as a crop. But yeah, it's really similar there. I oftentimes shoot portraits, you know, with cameras like the D750 or you know, in the past the D700 at 1600 ISO, and I can get very usable shots. Even with the 810, if you output a lower resolution file, you know, you can still get very good shots at those ISOs as well. 1600 ISO, you see a little bit of grain at this point, but there's really not a whole lot of noise at this point. Still lots of detail. 3200 ISO, similar story. It's incredible how well this camera does at these high ISO settings. In a lot of ways, 3200 ISO is like the new 800 ISO, it seems. It'll be interesting too to see how the D500 compares in a future video. Okay, let's see here. Going right on up, 6400 ISO here. Now this is where we start to see some pretty substantial noise, but there's still not really a very big difference in the amount of detail we're recording. So we're not losing a lot of detail because of high ISO at this point. I shot this test scene, and I did a little live Periscope broadcast whenever I was doing all this, but I shot this in a pretty dimly lit room, and I wanted to have a scene that had some things with lots of fine detail, but I also wanted to have some areas where we had, you know, some brighter highlights and some darker shadows to really give us a good assessment. Because a lot of times shooting in a situation at high ISO where you don't necessarily need high ISO, where you have a very evenly lit scene, you actually don't notice the true effects of the high ISO because you don't have any deep shadows or anything to evaluate. So that's why I went for a test scene that would give us a nice gamut of exposure information here. Okay, 6400 ISO. Yeah, I mean, 12,800 ISO still totally looks really good. I mean, you know, it's still extremely usable. I would definitely shoot, you know, like during a wedding ceremony at up to 12,800 ISO. No problem at all, especially if you convert it to black and white later. And of course, this is a 20 megapixel camera. If I were shooting a wedding or something like that, you know, I would probably end up outputting files that are around 6 to 8 megapixels. And yeah, I mean, at that resolution, it's only going to get that much better. Okay, let's see, let's go on up. 25,600 ISO. Now, this is where things get interesting, and this is exactly why I'm providing you guys with some, you know, with some raw files to take a look at on your own, because everyone's impression of what the quality should be is going to be just a little bit different. Not everyone is going to consider, you know, a given setting to be usable. In my personal opinion, and based on the way I shoot, I would say that I would, for most things, stop at 12,800 ISO in terms of, like, you know, people photography and that sort of thing. Now, I have plenty of friends that shoot concerts and things along those lines, and they would shoot at 25,600 ISO. At this particular ISO setting, you know, I would feel comfortable shooting a wedding reception, for example. You know, during the ceremony, you get lots of shots that people will want to print and such. But whenever everyone is all drunk at the party after the wedding, and you're just getting those last few little few moments there, no one is more than likely no one is going to want like an 8x10 or 16x20 print of, you know, some drunk person on the dance floor at the end of the night. So for me, this would totally be fine. But yeah, I mean, if you were shooting like a concert or doing some street photography or something like that, with that extra bit of added grain and such, gives it that extra bit of grittiness and so forth, I mean, this is totally usable. Okay, we're going up one more stop here. 51,000 ISO. Now this is where things get a little weird. You know, the colors are starting to go strange. The highlights, you know, definitely look a bit weird there, and there is a pretty severe hit to our detail. So, you know, for me, this is the domain of what I like to call emergency use only. So basically, if you've just got no other way of getting the shot, then this is where I would use this ISO setting. Okay, and then things get truly ridiculous from here. 102,400 ISO. Yeah, I'm not really sure what I would use this for. It's a snowstorm at this point. I mean, it's extremely bad. Once again, though, it depends on what you're doing. I've heard the argument be made that for people doing like some type of surveillance, I've even heard for like military applications and such, they might use an ISO that high. And, you know, I could see that. Okay, 102,000 ISO, 204,800 ISO. Yeah, it pretty much just keeps getting worse and worse from here. I would consider overall the end of this camera's usable ISO range to be something about something in the about 51,200 range. That's kind of like the end of usable as far as I'm concerned. 25,000 is still kind of more of a ideal. 25,000 to 12,800 to 25,000 seems to be the ideal high ISO. 50,000, you know, is, you know, if you just had to, and then 100,000 and up is just, it's kind of useless in my opinion. 102,400, 204,800 ISO. Yeah, it's just pretty much a snowstorm after that. It gets crazy. 409,600 ISO. It's, yeah, we're barely recording a picture at all at this point. 819,200 ISO. Oh my. Yeah, this is, it gets to be like a, you know, impressionist painting or something. It's just, yeah. And then we go up to 1,638,400 ISO. Oh my goodness. Shame on Nikon for putting this on there. They know they put this on the camera just for bragging rights, just so they could put it on the spec sheet to say that it goes up this high. It's actually very laughable. Oh my. And then we get to the obscene 3,276,800 ISO. And it's just, wow. I mean, look at that. It's, yeah, it's nothing at that point. So, anyways, though, this camera goes up to some very crazy high ISO ranges. But yeah, it definitely doesn't disappoint, you know, at more sane ISO range. It's amazing that we can take a photograph at, you know, at 25,000 ISO and get a very usable quality image still, you know, kind of depending on what you're doing. 12,800, I mean, I would use that without any second thought at all. It's that clean, so it looks very good. And of course, if you're concerned about low ISO DR, yeah, you know, the D810 has got your name on it. For me personally, as you guys know, I'm a portrait photographer. I very rarely shoot above 1600 ISO for most things that I do. Occasionally I'll go up to 3200. And you know, if I take 1,000 shots at a wedding, more than likely, probably about 50 of them are shot above 3200 ISO. So for me, the high ISO thing is not that big of a deal. So I'll stick with the D800, D810 range of cameras. And of course, whenever Nikon releases a D900 or whatever, then by all means, I'll be signing up for that. I am going to be bringing you guys another video talking about the D500, and perhaps we'll do a little bit of comparison and see how much of a difference full frame actually makes in terms of high ISO when given the same sensor technologies. Be sure to check me out on Instagram at PhotogJTheGreat, not PhotoGJ the Great. People seem to be misunderstanding my screen name. But anyways, PhotogJTheGreat is what I am on Instagram. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you have any questions or anything else that you'd like me to test on this camera. I am still taking suggestions. I'm looking for some very cool ideas to test out the D5 and D500. Write me about that in the comments below. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith. Signing off.